Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Following current events may have one wondering if we're losing the battle between politics, money, and true justice. Do we need to ask ourselves, is Lady Justice truly blind? Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on the X-Zone TV channel, xztv.ca. With us this hour to take a closer look at our legal system is James M. Porfido. James is a criminal trial attorney certified since 1995 by the Supreme Court of New Jersey and former chief of sex crimes, child abuse, and vehicular homicide units. He's an adjunct law professor who teaches persuasion and advocacy at Seton Hall University School of Law and a TV legal analyst in cases of national publicity and interest. He has been selected as a superior lawyer, criminal defense since 2002 through the present. His website, porfidolaw.com. James, thank you so much for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Thank you, Gwilda. Thank you for having me.
So, what prompted you to go into law?
Wow, that goes way back, probably to high school days. Just being the underdog, I feel like the fight was always there, and having to persuade people and being the littler guy in the sports world made me a little bit more, I'd say, prone to these kind of debates.
So finding justice hit you early on, huh?
Yeah. Finding your place, especially in a world where you're not the biggest or the best.
Tell us about your background and your experience.
Sure. I went to Seton Hall University in South Orange, New Jersey, undergrad, and I had a Bachelor of Arts degree. Then I went on to the University of Bridgeport School of Law in Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is now Quinnipiac School of Law. It was consumed after I graduated in 1988, and I did a judicial clerkship in New Jersey Superior Court with a Judge Ronald Graves, who went on to the appellate court in New Jersey. And then I got a job in the prosecutor's office, and it's funny how things go full circle, but I had an opportunity to work in a firm that was a small growing firm. And I decided or opted to go to the prosecutor's office and to get my feet wet trying cases and, getting that experience in criminal law, which was something I was always fascinated by. When I say go full circle, when I closed out my practice just in 2023, I became of counsel with a firm of 50 attorneys. And it's the very same firm that I interviewed with back in 1988 after I graduated law school. So it's funny how things work.
Yeah, they if you're supposed to be there, they come and get you, don't they?
Yeah. The name of the firm, I'll give them a plug, is Einhorn, Barbarito, Frost, Botwinick, Nunn, and Mosmano, and we're in Denville, New Jersey. Presently, we're going to be moving to Parsippany in the next couple of weeks.
Moving a business is always a challenge.
Yes, it sure is.
So what does it mean to be a certified criminal attorney?
Well, what that means is that the Supreme Court of New Jersey recognizes or distinguishes attorneys among their colleagues or their peers based upon their experience. And being a certified criminal trial attorney means that you have handled a volume of cases, either going all the way through to trial or to pre-trial, doing motions challenged in a court, appearing before juries. So you need to have certain, I'll say, criteria in order to satisfy that. And I've been thankful that I've been recertified over the years since 1995. And have maintained that certification through the Supreme Court of New Jersey.
Is the certification difficult to get and maintain?
It is only because it's a lot of record keeping. It's really keeping tabs on the work that you're doing. And fortunately for me, I was in the prosecutor's office, so I had easy access to the files and the resolutions and dispositions of cases, and certainly could keep tabs on the trials that I had. So it was a little bit easier, but I think it is a bit challenging and difficult because you have to concentrate in that area of law.
Keeping track of it all has to be challenging. So, yeah.
Yeah, the record keeping is for sure a challenge.
You mentioned closing your practice in 2023. Why did you close it?
Well, there was a lot of things, a lot of variables that came into play, and a big part of it was COVID, quite frankly. It changed the dynamics of the system and changed the rules that I was so akin to over the years. And I felt that my clients, and I was a defense attorney at this point and had been a defense attorney for more than 20 years, felt that they weren't getting a fair shake. And I felt that the COVID system that was put in place as basically a compromise to keep the cases moving, really wasn't recognizing individual rights, liberties. And I felt that my clients were, no matter what level of advocacy I provided to them and the passion behind the case, they just weren't getting their just due in court. And I felt they were being treated unfairly. Many of them were incarcerated for a significant period of time before ever getting their day in court.
So what were the issues around COVID that you were defending people for?
Sure. Well, New Jersey put in place, like many states did, they eliminated cash bails. And the idea behind it was it was a wonderful idea, is that you don't want people that are indigent in jail for minor offenses with a bail that's, $100, $200, and they're just sitting there because they can't post that money. Well, the idea of that was really wonderful, but what ended up happening in practice and in reality was that everybody would be incarcerated, and then they'd have to fight to be released because there was something called a pretrial detention, which is still happening, and people would be detained. And then what also changed is the judges were not judging simply on the criteria of risk of flight and danger to the community. They now had an algorithm. They had a mathematical calculation that was basically spit out of a computer, and it gave a score, and it would basically determine whether your client would be released or stay. And if they were charged with a serious offense, the likelihood is, and they were facing incarceration, if they were convicted, they weren't going anywhere. They were going to be sitting in jail, and it became very frustrating. So I think the system kind of, in my opinion, that backfired.
So what did that have to do with COVID?
Well, COVID kind of allowed that to happen. And then when COVID came into play, everything was being done virtually. So it was all being done over the computer, similar to what we're doing right now virtually. And, it just took out the camaraderie and the ability to communicate in person. And really, I feel, sacrifice the rights of the clients, because if you're an attorney that's animated and speak passionately and you're fiery in your presentation, I think that's lost when you're staring at a computer screen. So I felt that had changed dramatically, and I found that clients were being detained unreasonably for significant periods of time. And I filed many appeals to the appellate division or appeals court, and ultimately was not granted the relief I sought. The judges were upheld. The appellate courts were fine with saying, "Hey, this is what we have now, and we're gonna protect the community and keep these people incarcerated." And interestingly, we're seeing a very different dynamic today, where there's a soft on crime in many different jurisdictions, where people are committing crimes and they're walking the streets freely.
And that's frightening too. It's like
It sure is.
too far one way or too far the other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So are you still engaged in the practice of law? And if so, how?
I am. I'm of counsel with the firm that I mentioned, and we have 50 attorneys, and I'm in the criminal section. So I consult as a criminal defense attorney, and I refer my former clients. And from my practice of more than 20 years, I developed a huge number of clients over those years, and those are clients that continually call me if they get in trouble or they have an issue or problem, and I refer them to the firm and basically hand them off to the firm or give some advice or direction regarding their situation. So that's my role now. It's very passive compared to what I used to do, for sure. I'm not going to court every day, that's for sure.
So you've done both defense and prosecution. What are the pros and cons for you of doing one or the other?
Well, it's interesting because as a young lawyer, I felt like justice was on my side. I was wearing the white hat, and I represented the taxpayers, the people, and I felt akin to them when I was sitting or standing next to the jury. That's the way it is situated in the courtroom. The counsel table for the prosecution is always closest to the jury. So, I felt like I had a job to do, which was to get those people that had committed crimes off the street. And I felt like the jury recognized that I was doing something that they wanted very much. They wanted someone like me in that position. And I felt like, justice was fair at that time. I really felt like the rulings were favorable to me for reasons that, hey, I had the evidence or I could support the position I was taking. And then later on in life, or later on in my career, let's say, I became a defense attorney and found that it wasn't quite the same. I wasn't getting those benefits in rulings. And I felt that I had to work probably 10 times harder than the prosecutor had to work to convince the court in these pretrial issues or motions that we had regarding perhaps an illegal search and seizure or the Miranda, someone giving a statement to the police, whether they were properly advised of their rights and acknowledged and understood their rights. It didn't suffer from a mental disease or defect, which would have impaired or affected their ability to understand and give a voluntary waiver to giving a statement. So there were a lot of things that came up. And I then found that simply by moving from one counsel table to the other counsel table in the courtroom, that the system had changed dramatically. It was very different.
So it sounds like it's not as neutral. People tend to lean towards the guilty until proven innocent.
I started to think that, quite frankly, because innocent until proven guilty is a concept we all recognize in our constitutional principles and certainly in our law backgrounds through law school and through criminal, introduction to criminal law and criminal law in general. And I found that wasn't the case. It was almost like you had to disprove your client's guilt rather than the state having to prove they were guilty. So the burden really became shifted upon the defense to bring evidence forward. And I did that in many cases, hired experts and brought in people that could, say that the state's evidence was faulty or flawed, or that they perhaps didn't do what they needed to do, or maybe my client suffered from some mental disease or defect, which would have impaired their ability as far as a purposeful knowing intent. So there were a lot of issues that came up along the way.
It sounds like. And are the what changed that? I shouldn't have asked that because we're just about ready to go into a station break. So we'll pick up on that on the
Sure.
other side of a break. So James and I will return very shortly. So don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Does our legal system work anymore? Did it ever? This is with us this hour discussing the state of the U.S. legal system is James N. Porfido. James is the author of Unequal Justice, The Search for Truth to Balance the Scales. His website, porfidolaw.com. James, we were just talking about what happened and when did it happen that had, instead of the proven innocent until proven guilty, kind of switched the other direction to where it was like people were assuming guilt until proven innocent. When did that switch over?
Yeah, it seems like that's happened for quite a long time. It's really gone on it's almost systemic. I hate to say, but there are a number of cases where, prosecutors use jailhouse snitches, informants, and their credibility may be challenged or questioned. Quite frankly, they may not be telling the truth and they have an ulterior motive, which is to benefit themselves. That happens all too often. And a lot of times it's revealed to the prosecution that this individual, this witness, is not really being truthful or honest. And the prosecutor has an obligation to come forward and disclose that, but they don't do that. And many times the courts are complicit in that. Judges are complicit. And there are actual cases where that's happened, where people are, I'll say, framed. And that's a book I read very recently. It's a book by John Grisham. He doesn't usually venture into real life cases, but this is a book he co-authored with a guy by the name, I believe, Jim McCullough. And they talked about real life cases, and each one of them picked 5 cases of people that were wrongfully arrested, charged, arrested, convicted after trial, and sentenced, and with really significant sentences, to determine later on that there was evidence that it exculpated them, that they weren't the perpetrators of the crimes. And unfortunately, in some of the situations, the judges knew they were having what we call ex parte communications, or communications with the prosecutor without the defense attorney. So it was a very unfair, obviously, and unjust. And it actually happened. These are real cases that's just, the tip of the iceberg. That's only 10 cases. And I'm sure that's gone on many, many times.
How common do you think it is?
Well, I would venture to say it probably happens more than we guess, especially if somebody's been arrested for a very heinous crime, something that shocks the conscience, something that society, wants very much to have justice done, and they want that individual off the street. Once someone is the target of an investigation, sometimes they are very narrow-minded or myopic in their thinking, and they don't look to other possibilities, and the investigation becomes stymied, where they don't look at other suspects. That happens quite often, unfortunately, and it jades the entire process in the system when that happens.
So is it because of overload, just basic overload? There's so much going on that they try to take shortcuts to get to everybody and everything?
Well, I think there's a lot of variables. One is that there obviously, to feel like there's an appeasement of the community and the public. Um, Secondly, I feel like there's an attitude that permeates the system on the prosecution side, that this is a bad person and they can justify doing what they do, even though it may be unethical or improper. Not revealing exculpatory evidence that should be discoverable and should be turned over to the defense to say that there's another person out there that committed the crime. Very rarely does that happen, sadly. So sometimes it's just full steam ahead, and maybe a prosecutor that's looking to put a notch on their belt. And they feel like the only way to do that is to bring this individual to justice, and that brings them, I guess, the accolades that they're looking for.
So what happens to a person's life once they've been falsely accused and tried and all this stuff, even if they get it straightened out in the long run, what happens to their life as a result of that?
Well, you can only imagine people that lose their lives. Really, they're sentenced to a significant period of time for a murder they didn't commit. But for these Project Innocents, these groups that are out there that exist through funding, through law schools and things like that, where people are working on their cases almost pro bono, which means they're not being paid. And they're going back over the records, and they're looking at transcripts to see where there were mistakes made, or where the defense was not allowed to bring in witnesses, or perhaps the defense was not allowed to bring in a proper defense. And to comb through those records is so time consuming. And obviously to get through the appeals section of courts, and many of these people had already had appeals and they were denied. So it's almost like, once they've heard your appeal once and it's been denied, you come back again, they're like, it's like the boy that cried wolf, but there may truly be merit, and there certainly can be credence to their arguments. It's just the way it's presented and the timing in which it's presented. And some of these people have been sentenced for more than 20 years, taken off, their lives have been taken away from them. There were examples of that in the book that I just referenced, and that has happened, unfortunately, in real life.
So even if they get proven innocent and released from prison and everything else, their lives are forever destroyed on levels, aren't they?
Right, right. And it's not proven innocent, so we're clear. There's no need to prove your innocence. It's really whether the state maintained their burden of proof, whether they presented sufficient evidence. And it really, some evidence may have been improperly admitted, illegally admitted, perhaps a statement or a critical piece of evidence that was illegally seized. So, these things are overlooked. And sadly, like you say, people's lives are ruined. They're changed forever. They can't get that back. You can't get those years back. It's impossible. And, loved ones are gone, during that period of incarceration. And it's not a pleasant situation to be incarcerated by any stretch of the imagination, to be, removed from society and put in that kind of an environment.
And then what's their recourse once they're out? I mean, their ability to get jobs and be respected, has that been impacted as well?
Oh, of course. And there may be an issue of compensation where there's a recognition that something bad was done here, and they need to somehow correct it, and they give money. It's like, but money's not going to solve that. You can give somebody $1 million. It's not going to change the fact that they lost 20 years of their life, or that their brother or their sister or their mom or dad are gone while they were incarcerated, and they weren't able to even, go to the funeral. So,
It's heartbreaking set of affairs.
yeah.
So you say Lady Justice is not truly blind. Would you explain that, please?
Yeah. So the cover of my book is that I have Lady Justice depicted, and, I actually have the book right here. Lady Justice is actually peeking out from the blindfold. So she's not truly blind. She's actually, and the scales of justice are imbalanced. In other words, they're unfairly tipped. So the way I viewed it is that it's really not blind, in that, both sides are getting their day in court where it's a level playing field. I didn't feel that when I was on the defense side. I felt that it was imbalanced. I felt that there were a lot of advantages on the prosecution side. And many times, I would file motions to suppress statements or evidence, and it almost became the burden upon me to stand there and to make the arguments, rather than the prosecutor saying why the evidence should be admitted and how it was done properly. I was on the other side arguing that there was case law to support the reasons why I had filed that motion or application to the court, and that clearly we had demonstrated that this evidence should be suppressed. And judges, quite frankly, in my estimation and from my experience, they just didn't listen, regardless of the strength of the argument or the case law that supported the arguments.
So, as former chief of sex crimes, child abuse, and vehicular homicide units, what's your perspective on the allegations against Trump and the Epstein files?
Well, that's an interesting set of circumstances. I mean, I honestly, I had said years, and shortly after Ghislaine Maxwell's conviction, that she's a source of information. I mean, why isn't it that they haven't spoken to her and cut a deal with her to get this information? And I have to believe there are some pretty important people that have been involved. And certainly we know that from what we've heard in the media, and certainly exposure to Netflix and, the Epstein shows that are on Netflix. I think there's 2 or 3 of them on there right now, which talk about, what was really going on behind the scenes and how this guy was a real power broker. And really, I have no doubt that he was extorting people. So what I believe is that ultimately this information has to be turned over. And, regardless of who's involved, it doesn't matter to me whether you're, it doesn't matter if you're a head of state, you're a prime minister, or a king, a president, doesn't matter. If there was a wrong that was committed, it needs to be made known. Sadly, as far as justice is concerned, I don't think that there will ever be justice for the victims, because there were so many.
So many and such horrendous things going on. So is the, is the cover up, if there is, or lack of searching into it, is that because of who has the money, who has the position?
Well, it could be part of it, sure. There probably are some pretty important people, and why? I mean, I have a really difficult time understanding, regardless of political analysis or side of the fence you're on, that there's not an ability to connect the dots. I really have a difficult time with that, because here's plane rides to this Lolita Island. He was in the company of many, many important people that were higher up, and there was obviously a disclosure of that and recognition of that in the public eye. So I have a really difficult time that they can't connect the dots. There's got to be a paper trail here. I mean, we know that he had videotapes in his home all over. So we know that there's records that exist. Why it's not being made known, and I think, quite frankly, it's a stain on the administration not to just release this information and get it out there so that they can dispel all this scuttlebutt that's out there about who's involved and why it's not being released. That was part of the goal of, quite frankly, the U.S. Attorney's Office and Pam Bondi's mission, and Kash Patel as the FBI director, to kind of get this out there in the public eye, and to say now there's nothing there, nothing here. Don't look. Let's not focus on this. It's really hard for people, the general public, citizens, to accept that and believe that.
Particularly if it's being withheld. I mean, if there's nothing there, why is it dusted under the rug, if you will?
Yeah. And quite frankly, a good investigation is not going to take all that long to kind of reveal this information. Certainly if you assign a number of, investigators or detectives to that, they're going to find it very quickly. And I'm sure there's phone records. There's so much there. There's got to be. I just have a really difficult time as a former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney seeing that there isn't, those inferences that can be drawn in direct evidence, quite frankly.
Well, we're going to have to take another station break. James and I will be right back to continue our discussion. So stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Is there any justice? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing the search for justice is James N. Porfido. His website, porfidolaw.com. James, we were talking about the Epstein files and President Trump's possible involvement there. And you were saying that, the cover up is not serving anyone. Is it serving someone that's trying to cover that in fact, possibly Trump was involved?
Well, I think what we've recently heard, now this is obviously in the public, out there in the public domain, is that Ghislaine Maxwell has finally been interviewed by Todd Blanche, who is, I believe, second in charge to Pam Bondi in the U.S. Attorney's Office. And, they've released the transcripts of those interviews, and she's indicated that President Trump had no involvement whatsoever. And people are having a difficult time believing that, because obviously partisan interests take over and people want to believe what they want to believe. So one side is saying, well, she's only saying that because she wants the benefit of some pardon or some favorable treatment or leniency. And of course,
Lord knows he's handed a fair amount of that out.
Yeah. Well, and the other side is saying, well, what she's saying, what's true. She equally said that she didn't think that Bill Clinton was involved, which is contrary to the evidence that's out there. The evidence is that he was actually on these flights to this island where Jeffrey Epstein was engaging in pedophilia and all kinds of other charades and antics that were criminal. So, she did not give that information. So, I think she was being fair in her assessment. Whether that's true, I can't say. I don't know. But, I think there are certainly some important people involved. And like I said before, I do believe there's got to be evidence to support the allegations against these individuals, because there was a lot of record keeping here that I find it very difficult to believe that it's just not out there and they can't be revealed at some point. And why it hasn't been at this point, I can't answer that either.
It's definitely a conundrum, isn't it? So now let's draw on your expertise as a legal analyst on cases of national publicity. What do we have to learn about criminal justice from the alleged disregard for the law displayed by the current administration?
Well, I guess beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So, as a strict constitutionalist, whether or not um, those are true or not, that remains to be seen. We have a lot of, and we've seen judges that are very partisan, depending upon their appointment, and we live in a very fractured society, sadly. Where partisan interests seem to take control, and people can't engage in an intelligent dialogue about their differences of opinion, especially when it comes to politics. It's sad to see. But whether or not the president is acting within the scope of his power in the executive branch, we do have a separation of powers in this country. We have three branches of government, and that's we have to look at that. The judiciary branch, whether they have the ability to stop a president's actions, well, it depends. If they're unlawful, but if he's exercising his function as an executive officer and using that branch of government in that capacity, the judicial branch was not set up to challenge the court or challenge the president. That's just not the way our system was designed way back when it was founded by our founding fathers. So, it depends on your views, really, quite frankly, and it depends on which cases are going before the courts. I have a difficult time believing, that there's a lot of lobby behind criminal illegal aliens to keep them in the country. I just have a difficult time with that on a personal level. And certainly I represented people during the Obama administration where they were deported for committing crimes, and nobody seemed to have anything to say about that then. We didn't see this huge hue and cry from the Republican Party saying that he was deporting these people. Everybody felt it was the right thing to do. If they committed a crime that was a heinous crime, they were not legal in the country. They were deported, and he deported quite a few people, and that's not even talked about. It's it has to be both sides. I'm a very, very, very balanced person, and I look at things from both sides, and what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Or if you're doing it on one side and the other side's doing something that, quite frankly, shouldn't be done, well, then let's reveal that and let's show that.
So James, on the side of fairness, what Obama was doing was way smaller in proportions. He didn't have people going from door to door wearing masks and dragging people out of their homes because they were illegal aliens. I don't think it was to that extreme. So even though he did do deportations, are we looking at um, overboard here?
Well, I don't agree with that, because when I see protesters with masks on, and I see that ICE officers are being doxxed and people are going to their homes, and if their identities are revealed, I'm concerned about that. I mean, once we start negating law enforcement, and we see a tremendous disrespect for law enforcement today in our society. Police officers are gunned down and killed more now than ever, and that's an attitude that permeates our society. So, listen, I think the numbers speak for themselves, and if you look at the actual numbers, and I'm not in favor of raiding a facility to deport somebody that's just simply illegal. If we're going to focus on people that committed crimes, serious crimes against society, um, and they're walking our streets and they're illegal, they don't belong in our country, quite frankly. They didn't belong here to begin with, and then they've committed crimes. And then I look at the innocent victims out there that have been slain by illegals that should not have been in the country, and there's no recognition of that. I don't see any remorse on the other side saying, we made a mistake. Just own up to it. You allowed millions of people into this country illegally. You open the borders, and there's no excuse for that. I'm sorry. We are a country of borders. Every country is, I don't understand it. I have a difficult time seeing it. And I think if you look at the numbers, they're actually staggering on the other side. Obama did it. Maybe the ICE officers weren't wearing masks, but they certainly were deporting a large volume of people.
Did they have ICE back then? Did they have
Sure
specific
did.
officers?
Yeah.
Did they? I didn't
Yeah.
know that. Okay.
Immigration, customization, enforcement. Yes, it's been around for quite some time.
You said that our system wasn't set up to police a president, to restrict things if he was stepping out of line. Um, do you see that as a problem?
Well, I don't say that willy-nilly. I mean, if he's not exercising his constitutional um, powers and authorities, that's something different. That's something different. No one's above the law. We've heard that so many times. I mean, we're looking at John Bolton, where they just raided his home. Again, no one seemed to have a problem when Mar-a-Lago was raided. A former president saying that he was concealing secret documents. And then when it happens with John Bolton, who was actually part of Trump's cabinet previously, and he wrote a book and disclosed national intelligence, and that's something that, quite frankly, he was advised not to do, and did it anyway. So look, when someone's acting beyond and above what their constitutional authority is, I have no problem with that. That there's an enforcement or there's an action brought, but we're seeing a lot of litigation today where we have very partisan courts taking a very active role in trying to undo the decisions that are being made, and I don't know that I can agree with that either, regardless of which side.
So I guess it boils down to, does the American justice system have any teeth left?
Well, it does. It does when it's used properly and it's executed properly. If it's abused, no. I hold a lot of hope because our system has endured. Our criminal justice system has endured from the birth of our nation. We borrowed from English common law, and that's the roots of our system. And it's grown and evolved over the years. Not always in the best way, but I've seen a lot of good things have developed over the years. For instance, Fifth Amendment rights under Miranda versus Arizona. That was the case in 1964 that allowed people to be advised of their constitutional rights prior to making incriminatory statements to the police. Search and seizure law has developed under the Fourth Amendment, which protects us against unreasonable searches and seizures. That's developed through the years, through cases and protections that have been afforded to us as individuals. So I see good things that have developed. The Sixth Amendment regarding the confrontation clause, confronting witnesses against you when you're accused of a crime, or your right to counsel under the Sixth Amendment. Those are very valuable rights, the Fourth, the Fifth, and the Sixth Amendments in the criminal process. And I do see cases where those are upheld, and courts are very they recognize the importance of those constitutional principles. Now, I can't say that I always experience them in my experience as a criminal defense attorney, but they certainly were something that were very high up on the pecking order, let's say. That would be the first avenue to explore as a good, effective defense attorney.
So we all have seen on various places, the news, social media, et cetera, this nice long laundry list of things that President Trump supposedly has been convicted of, that he is, the word's out there, that he is indeed a convicted criminal. Is there any accuracy to that?
Well, again, it depends on which side of the fence you're on here, because I don't believe in any of that, and I see we're finding out that these were all sham prosecutions. Look at the forces behind them. In fact, just last week, the decision of the court was reversed. Judge Engeron in New York's $500 million verdict against Trump was thrown out, claiming that he falsified or gave false information regarding the valuation of Mar-a-Lago for a mortgage. And there was no victims in that case, but it was motivated by political prosecution against him by Letitia James, the the Attorney General of New York, who now is under a microscope herself for, illegally filing for mortgages and falsifying documents. Alvin Bragg, who was the prosecution behind that. So, we're seeing this. And then if you go as far down as the cases in Georgia, they're all being thrown out. So, there was, in my opinion, a weaponization of the Justice Department against him and to stop him. And you know what? I think justice was served because he's the president. And you know what? The voters have spoken, and I really have no issue with that. Whether you like or dislike the man, I don't know. But what I think was done, quite frankly, was unjust. And I think it was a weaponization, and we were unjust prosecutions that were allowed to happen. And the chickens are coming home to roost because those decisions are all being overturned. And the prosecutors that were in those cases are being subject to, a lot of scrutiny, which they should be.
So it is that magic moment again. We get to take another station break. Please stay with us as James and I continue to explore our current legal dilemmas. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Is it about truth or money? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with James N. Porfido. His website, porfidolaw.com. James, is the American justice system really a process to get justice, or is it motivated by personal drive, ambition, and the political whims of the administration?
Well, it's interesting you say that because it really could be a little of both, and it does appear to be, because we've seen how the tide has turned, so to speak. And what I mean by that is that we're seeing, cases now being presented, perhaps like against James Comey or Brenner, John Brenner, I'm sorry, and James Clapper, that, those individuals are very critical and had positions in our government. So, we're seeing a different turn in it, and it depends, I guess, so is it justice being done, or is it political partisanism or the utilization of the Department of Justice for improper purposes? And then that's something that, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, quite frankly. And, no matter what people's beliefs or opinions are, that's what they are. And, I've learned a long time ago, I'm not going to change somebody's opinion.
Yeah, everybody's got one, don't they? So, do you see our justice system as deteriorating, or are we just starting to recognize its failings?
Well, I don't want to say it's deteriorating. It's really the best we've got, and it works most times. But when it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and if it doesn't work for one, it doesn't work for all. I'm a big proponent and believer of that if it fails one individual, it's really failed us all. So it's got to work, and no system can work 100% of the time. It's just not feasible or doable. There are flaws inherent within the system that create problems, whether it's a partisan prosecutor or a biased judge who's not neutral, unbiased, and impartial, whether you select a jury that's truly an impartial jury of your peers, or whether there's somebody on that jury panel that's been selected to hear a case that's already got a predetermined notion or view. So you've got to look at every one of those situations, and quite frankly, there's problems. Do you have a good, competent, qualified defense attorney that's fighting aggressively for you, or are they just sitting there on their hands doing nothing? It's a tough one. It's tough to say.
Well, when the system was set up, for that matter, when the Constitution was set up, there was way fewer people that were involved, way fewer people that had to be policed, if you will, a lot fewer cases that had to be heard. What do you think, that we've outgrown the system that was put in place back then?
I don't believe so. It's funny you say that because, the First Amendment grants us freedom of speech. Now, can you say that our founding fathers back in the day, in the creation of our Constitution, ever imagined child pornography or pornography in general being protected speech, or hate speech being protected, where you're chanting and screaming and having protest rallies and death to Israel or whatever it may be. Was that ever imagined? No. But we've got to obviously use what we have. I don't want to say throw out the system we have, because I don't believe it's that flawed. I believe there are opportunities to improve and advance it. And it has done that over the years. It's evolved and changed. So I do believe that there's that opportunity to do it. It's subject to interpretation, of course.
Well, with all the things going on right now, it looks like a lot of people are kind of losing faith in the system. Is that what you're seeing?
Well, yeah, I think that is true. But if you were to boil it down on political levels, you might have half of the country agreeing that it's flawed, and you might have the other half saying, well, it's finally working. So I guess it depends on your perception of how things are going, at that particular point in time. Why the reports about JFK's assassination are being released now? No one's around. Shouldn't we have known what was the basis upon which he was assassinated? Who was involved? Who were the players? I mean, there's so much to ask. And similar to Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, their assassinations, why aren't those records being revealed and released? And why are they protected by governmental interests? Is there some level of involvement on the government's part that they're trying to protect, and they don't want people to know?
And I think a lot of the American people are good and truly tired of being treated like children, with information withheld. That doesn't seem like it lines up with the freedom of speech, people being held accountable, that sort of thing. It looks more like it's protecting the guilty.
Yeah, well, the disclosure is so important because it really is therapeutic in a lot of ways. People get the information and then they can process it the way they deem appropriate, and they can have their own opinions of the information, as to how, but to wait and not to release it obviously creates that hole, similar to what the Epstein situation is doing today.
If they hide information, people are going to make up their own, right?
Sure, they're going to make their own minds up and have their own opinions.
And so that's not really serving our well-being at all. It would appear, because then people on this fence, people on that fence, lots of
Sure.
polarization going on. The truth disappears underneath all of that.
Right.
So is there no accountability anymore? You just, oh, it's okay, we'll just hide the files.
I don't see that as appropriate under any circumstances, quite frankly. I think disclosure is so important in all situations, to reveal and disclose information and to have people, educated about that. And I think being educated is so important. And, there shouldn't be a media bias one way or the other, quite frankly. As a viewer or listener of news today, which is quite different today than it was, 20 years ago.
Where's Walter Cronkite when we need him, right?
Yeah, well, you were the listener, you were the viewer, and you just got the facts, and then you determined which side you thought that something should be handled on, or you took an opinion one way or the other. It's not like that now. It's a lot of opinion pieces, not so much about facts, and that's sad, because it's really what it's done is it's divided society on so many levels.
Well, the level of polarization we're experiencing now is almost epic.
Mhm.
How do you see that impacting in the country?
Well, I'm not involved in politics. I for a reason, I'm not involved in politics. It's not good. It's not a healthy environment. And, to have polarization on two sides, people are just fighting and arguing over silly things, and maybe they're not silly, but people have very different opinions. And like I said, you can't put two people in a room that have differences of opinion, because it doesn't turn into anything but an argument. And that's not healthy. I mean, really, there has to be a give and take and a respect for the other individual. Listen, we're all Americans, quite frankly, and regardless of what your viewpoints may be. We all support our country. We don't want our country to fail. At least I certainly don't, and I would hope that most people don't want that. My dad fought in World War II for this country, so
As did mine. It's like,
yeah, so it's like it's very different today, though. I see just very different things, and it's sad to see, quite frankly. I don't like what I'm seeing.
I'm with you there. So, does the current process of law result in compromise between justice and political agendas?
Many times it does. Sadly, it does. Yeah, there's a lot of times where deals are struck, and you know, there's something behind the scenes that is motivating that case going away and perhaps not continuing on in the public eye to trial. Where so many times there's an agenda. There's certainly some interests that are underlying the case itself, or the prosecution, or the motivation behind um, the arrest and the charging. So yeah, but I don't want to say plea bargaining is a bad thing, because without it, I don't know that our system could function. It would basically, the weight of the system would crack, the system. We couldn't possibly function without people acknowledging their guilt and pleading guilty, and disposing of cases in that way. What that does is it encourages people to plead guilty because they get a better deal. They might get more favorable treatment in terms of sentencing if they plead guilty, rather than going to trial where they're subject to the maximum fines and penalties. So I understand it. I get it. I understand why plea bargaining happens, but there's a lot that happens in each individual case behind the scenes that may lead to that decision being made.
But the basis behind plea bargaining is lying, is it not?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I mean, there's actually good motivation behind plea bargaining, and which is that it's an effective, as I said, it's an effective tool to resolve a case. And if I were to downgrade a charge, perhaps as a prosecutor, from an aggravated sexual assault to a sexual assault, well, you might not say that means a heck of a lot to me. Or if I were to take a murder charge and amend it to a manslaughter charge, well, the difference is significant in terms of the years of imprisonment that someone might be subject to. And like for instance, a murder charge would be 30 years to life versus a manslaughter, which is 10 years. So there's a significant difference. And people might say, you know what, I'm willing to plead guilty to this or that, and but I'm not willing to plead guilty to that. Well, that puts everybody in an impasse when there's, this clear lines in the sand. Either the case has got to go to trial and be litigated before a jury, which is a very costly process today.
That takes us back to money, doesn't it, rather
Sure
than
does.
justice?
Right. Right.
Expedience rather than justice, money and expedience rather than the truth. Somehow that just doesn't settle well with me. So, what strategies can you offer for getting true justice?
Well, that's honestly, I have to say that as a private defense attorney, money is an issue, and it was an issue, quite frankly. There were many times where I unfortunately had to make an application or a motion to the court to be relieved as counsel because my clients couldn't pay me. They just couldn't afford to continue with the litigation costs. And I found that became a tool that was utilized by the state or the prosecution, where they would basically have unnecessary court appearances where you would have to appear with your client, and that would cost money, obviously, and then it would deplete the retainer. So
And where's the justice in that?
right. So at some point, you're saying, I've got to make a motion to get out of this case, because you have a conversation with the client, say, look, you owe me a lot of
Well,
money, and you're not
unfortunately,
paying.
unfortunately, on this note, we are out of time. Thank you so much for coming on the show, James.
Thank you,
It was a
Gwilda. Thanks
pleasure.
so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Our guest this hour has been James N. Porfido, certified criminal trial attorney and the author of Unequal Justice: The Search for Truth to Balance the Scales. To find out more about James, where you can find his book and all he has to offer, visit his website, porfidolaw.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. But please be sure to join us again right here on the X Zone TV channel, xztv.ca, where this mission will continue, bringing information, resources, and support to our evolving world.